This is the Ukrainian Fire Chaplain Show.
911.
2-week-old in cardiac arrest. I need EMS on the run.
Screaming in the background. They're saying there may be children in the house.
Currently in agonal breathing. The baby's unresponsive.
Go and give me back to arm.
25 in a row.
Has a machine gun, another shooter inside the building.
Whole traffic, shots fired.
Looks like we have a working fire.
EMS is sending 2 trucks.
Agency assist, EMS and fire are already in the route.
Heavy fire on the second floor. People inside.
Slava Isusu Christu, glory to Jesus Christ. This is your host, Christopher, with the Ukrainian Fire Chaplain Show. If you haven't already, check out our website, www.theufcshow.com. Learn a little bit more about us, some of the platforms that we're on, and ways that you could support us if you were interested. We have a jam-packed episode for you today. I have none other than the American firefighting hero, Mike Staley. Mike and I go back as personal friends, and before that, a customer of a business I used to own almost a decade. But we have some family connections that go back further than that. As I had mentioned, Mike was one of the big reasons why I eventually entered into the fire service, why I went back to graduate school, and have set my hand toward the plow, so to speak, for doing more work for the Lord. Mike has been an amazing inspiration, a friend through many times, both quite trying when our youngest son was in the cardiac ICU, and so many other different ways. I just, man, he has been such a huge inspiration. I felt it was worth bringing him onto the show here. We are going to get into some of the details of the incident that happened with him, but you're going to see that Mike has a true fireman's sense of humor. We are going to be talking about everything from aspects of his life, some of the struggles with his mom basically being a single parent, raising him with his dad's clandestine work for the government. We are going to be talking about part of why he got into the fire service, his influences, how he dealt with that great tragedy that happened to him on the Daytona Speedway. We are also going to be looking at his advice for firefighters and first responders today, whether that was influenced by friends of his that he lost on 9/11, 5 FDNY firemen that were friends with Mike, or whether that is just going to be from his various life experiences, particularly in emergency management after being forced out of the fire service. But stick with me. This is a long chat with him, but I know you're going to love it. And if you check out the show notes, I will put some kind of time points at various points of what we're talking to. So if you wanted to skip through, but I'm also going to be taking some excerpts from this interview and posting the shorter excerpts onto my YouTube channel of the Ukrainian Fire Chaplain Show. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our interview with Mike. Mike, are you there with me?
I am with you.
Good afternoon. How are you doing today?
Christopher, all is well. It's a beautiful day.
Now, how is everything with the post-hurricane recovery, with everything going down on in Florida still with you guys?
Well, so for everyone, I am on the east coast of Florida, just north of New Smyrna Beach. And that's where Hurricane Ian came out. Our area was devastated, not to the point of Fort Myers and those souls on the west coast, but the erosion that happened to our beaches was devastating. And again, first world problems. There's so many people that were flooded in our area. The challenge to remove the debris is still ongoing, and they feel by the local news it's going to be at least another 3 weeks until all the vegetation and household, I'll say debris is going to be cleared. But fortunately, in my neighborhood, we weathered well. We're thankful.
Now, you had sent me a picture when all of this was going on of one of your friends. How far away was he? Because the picture you sent me was of, him looking out his living room window with his cars and everything half underwater. How far away were you from that?
So that is about 4 miles from my house. Truly, within 1 mile of my house in a radius, there are a handful of houses and apartment buildings with no roofs.
Well, I am glad that it seems you and at least most of your neighbors have survived and not been physically injured or lost their lives over this in spite of the terrible tragedy. But we're going to kind of go back to, what I wanted to ask you about a little bit with the tragedy that happened to you back in 1990. Would you mind, I've kind of prefaced that a little bit going into that, but would you mind just telling us, walking us through that day's events for you on the raceway?
I'll be happy to. Like all firefighters, we all work a couple of jobs. And I found out early in my career that the more you teach, the more you learn. So working at the Daytona International Speedway actually gave me an area of, I'll say, complete silence except for engine roar, to be able to write lesson plans for teaching at the community college. Working at the Daytona International Speedway is by invitation only. We work hard to have the best of the best individuals for life safety. Most people don't realize that at these super speedways, we have a physical hospital, we have emergency rooms, and the day that I was working, I was assigned to the fourth turn, aka Calamity Corner, and I always felt I was safer working the speedway than I was an extra shift at the department because everything is physically orchestrated. And on that day, I was working with my partner that we worked at different fire departments, but we worked together at the Speedway consistently for 14 years. It was just another day. There was no making lesson plans that day, and we're sitting, and it's almost the end of the race, and I had just poured us some carrot juice. My buddy would always say going to the Speedway is like a picnic, and it was because I always packed lunch. And I'm being very careful not to spill any carrot juice that day, as NBC had already interviewed us prior to the race as they were doing a special on the medical care at the Speedway. So it was just another call. And as many people in the civilian world might not recognize, because you just think it's just another call. And you can hear the tires popping in the background in the third turn. So you know at 180, 210 miles an hour that these cars are going, it's going to slide a bit before they come to a complete stop. The caution light went out. Uniquely enough, for driving 500 feet, we still put our seatbelts on. And we put our seatbelts on, and the lights signify we acknowledge that there was a crash in our area. The dispatcher that is at the start-finish line in one of the control booths there at the Speedway told us to go out on the track, and I was assigned the vehicle to go to. And there's different tells in the race car industry to help everybody. The first one for the drivers is them taking the net down to the window beside them. That is an indicator that they're conscious and alert, and they might be injured, but they're able to give you that sign. Well, as we approached and I got out of the vehicle, the driver wasn't taking the net down. So that was a tell to me. And as I approached the car and started to take the net down, telling the individual who I was and why I was there and what we were going to do, I saw something black, loud, and roaring, and then an explosion like I'd never heard before. Mathematicians went ahead years later and looked at the frames of the video, because it was on live television and being recorded, that it was a 9G hit or spin that I was in the air. So I lost consciousness during that spin of a time and a half, or as my friends like to say, best flip, worst landing.
Yeah, they gave you a medal with that on it, didn't they? As a tongue-in-cheek joke from the firehouse, didn't they?
It was actually from the sheriff's department helicopter that went ahead and airlifted me out. Did give me a medal. They came to the ICU, in fact, and it was very funny in the fact that these two deputies in their flight suits with their shoulder holsters were told by the nursing staff that they weren't allowed to see me, with the lead deputy saying, "You're in Volusia County. I can go anywhere I want to, and I have a medal to present." And so it was quite humorous. So the crash happened. I don't remember flying through the air. The next thing I remember is hearing something roaring and funking around my head. And I went to take a deep breath and I couldn't inhale. And I thought, well, if I just move my head around, I'll be able to breathe. And I couldn't. All of a sudden, that thunking noise came to a complete stop. And I heard my friends screaming and talking to each other and calling my name. And during that time, one of the individuals who has a strong North Carolina drawl was saying, Mock, I'm going to put my hand in your mouth and I don't want you to bite me. You've got sod all over your face. And I thought to myself, okay, Bill, I promise not to bite you. I would like to breathe. And he went ahead and moved that sod. I was melting to the manifold system underneath the vehicle. My left arm was entangled in it.
With the side pipe exhaust, yep.
And so from that, pure manpower moved the vehicle enough that they were able to get me out from the vehicle. And then they rolled me over. I was face down, holding proper traction on my head and such, and neck. And I looked up at them and told them I passed command. I'm no longer in charge of the scene. And a couple of them just started laughing and recognized, this is our bud here, and he's going to be okay. Go ahead.
From what I've learned about this after the fact, this was probably one of the worst calls that they had run. I think we had talked about this before as friends, but I don't think any of them had run, an injured friend or family member that you had mentioned before. So, how are you, in hindsight, how are you thinking about, their ability to process and work through this? Seeing you right.
So, my backup team was en route when I was dispatched. They were dispatched from the central ambulance, well, the hospital at the Speedway infield. And so, again, it's training and practice and updating and reviews. We had never practiced taking care of one of our own people in all of the exercises that we had. There was never a scenario where one of us got hurt in the 14 years that I had worked there. So my faith in having a total of 5 paramedics, 2 trauma surgeons, and a respiratory therapist at my side, in which I later learned in 17 seconds, was amazing. And everyone on the call, I either went to school with, I was taught by, or had taught them with life-saving skills. So I was fully aware of their capabilities from the Sheriff's Department helicopter to everybody that was around me. Things were happening quickly. I started telling them what I thought was the worst problem with me. You get stripped naked, and they put the mask trousers on me, which is an antique in
kind of an outdated
medical care.
technology, isn't? I think we've gone away from that.
Yeah, that stopped within, I think, 2 or 3 years of the incident, but it worked for me. And I can tell you, those inflating it, those creases pinch, but again, small problems. My partner was at my side as they were taking me to the helicopter, and he's telling me that he'll be at the hospital soon, and my mother would be taken to the hospital, and he would sit with her. And I thanked him, and I shook his hand. I says, things are going to work out the best I could. When I got into the helicopter and they're securing me, and I just thought, if I close my eyes and just take a deep breath and relax and slow myself down, it'll really help me make my way through this. And I was a little too silent and holding my breath too long till the helicopter medic went ahead and took his fist and did a sternal rub on me. And, I looked up at him, and it's ripping the hair off of my chest as he was vigorous in his actions. And I'm going, I'm going to be squared away. I'm awake. I'm with you. And he says, Mike, I'm going to start assisting your breathing. And when the top of that amber bag came over me, it was a moment. 2-minute flight to the hospital. It was a hot landing. Usually there are the stopping of the rotors and such. Mm-hmm. But because there was additional patients at the Speedway, it didn't stop. And they got me out of there and got me into the trauma room. They started doing the things that they do to trauma patients. I've done it dozens of times for others. It's different on the other side of the coin. I started telling them what I thought was wrong with me. The trauma surgeon, one of the trauma surgeons, flew in with me. Did some initial testing of using belly sticks, which is a large needle going in the abdomen, to find out about my internal bleeding. Mm-hmm. And they did that once, and I was clean. And the trauma surgeon said, no, let's do that again. I just saw what happened here. And the impact was at 160 miles an hour. So he figured that one out pretty quickly. But they started telling me about my left arm and a orthopedic surgeon said, Mike, I'm going to tell you, it looks like we're going to have to amputate left arm. And at that point, that was a moment of pause for me because I was left-handed and I raced catamarans on my days off from the fire department. That was my primary hobby. And I looked at him and I says, when I wake up, I want to see my left arm. So I don't care what you do or who you have to talk to, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
From time of impact to time in surgery was 32 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, the golden hour really worked out for me.
Emotionally, where, with your memory of the events, do you see certain points where you were fighting that wave of, like with my own son's cardiac arrest? I mean, I can look back and see moments where I was pushing my emotions to the side to focus on what I felt had to be done. And then I could kind of feel at moments where I was more like what most people would react. And I kept trying to keep those emotions within reason and tried to let my mind and my training, and myself overcome that, to not let my emotions overcome me. Where were you at? Cause where were you at during these various parts?
Some people talk about a roller coaster, but it wasn't a roller coaster. It would be like calm and then a rocket taking off of emotions, and then calm and a rocket taking off of emotions. When I first got into the trauma room and they were describing, 34 white male, vehicle, crash, and just started, and the scribe started, taking the notes. And I'm thinking like, holy crap, they don't even recognize me.
Mm-hmm.
And the trauma surgeon said, hey, this is Mike Staley with Fire Rescue. One of the nurses had to leave.
Yeah.
And she is a good buddy. But the trauma to my friends was extreme.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma alert brought the chaplain on duty. And I recognized him as a Catholic priest. And he says, Mike, I want to give you the last rites. I said, pray for them. Put your prayers onto the team that's helping me. That's who needs to help the most.
Wow.
So that was that. It was just, people talk about a roller coaster, but it definitely wasn't a roller coaster. It was like a spike up into the sky and then a free fall to what normal should be. And because things are acting so quickly, like with your son's resuscitation, it's a dance. It's procedures, it's policies, it's protocol. And when you know it, you know what's happening. You can fool some of the people some of the time. But when you're in the business, you know where things are heading, even going up or going down.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I saw it coming on before it happened, and it took me 2 months to really be willing to look at everything with what happened with him. And to try to emotionally overcome what I thought were my own memory of the events and afterwards, because I had all of these conceptions of what I thought I did or said. And, it was ironic. I think one of the few things that I had said to one of the cops before I got back in the ambulance to help take over care, because there were no paramedic units available. So that pretty much left me as not only the highest license, but I think the most experienced person on scene for my license level as an advanced EMT. And, there was this moment where like I had this thought of my wife and was like, hey, look, please have someone stay with my wife until family can get here and she can come join me at the hospital, because we had a whole bunch of younger kids. There's no way to, and I didn't want my wife driving. She was very, very well composed externally, but emotionally, I knew what she was going through and did not want her driving. But, so much of that for me even was just thinking about her in that moment's notice and then going right back to, I have a job to do.
Life-saving care isn't for the weak of heart. And, those that are in the profession and want to grow with the craft of saving lives have that passion. I'm, again, more fortunate than most in the fact that I learned that passion as a 16-year-old, being a junior volunteer firefighter, and seeing the difference that a volunteer fire department could make, and then having the dream and the goal to be at first I said professional firefighter, but I've changed that as years gone on, because I can remember my first rookie school here in Florida. I was watching a professional fire department do an evolution, and I physically said, you guys might get paid for this, but I have a volunteer fire department that would absolutely knock your socks off completing the evolution you just did. So I changed it from, career or to career versus volunteer and professional, because there are so many professional people that are volunteers and do the work. So, again, for me, I always thought of it as a privilege to serve. And you've heard me say, I have a advantage among the people that I work with now in the civilian field, because I was a career firefighter, and the teachings and the medical background that I had, I will blatantly say, puts me at the master's and PhD level of understanding compared to some of the individuals that are, I'll say, formally educated in life.
That reminds me of one of my dad's quotes. He said that, if nothing you've done is of any worth, he said, what do you get, or what can you bring when nothing carries over? And he's like, experience and perspective. Now let me, you're in, and really, I mean, a lot of that obviously does not directly translate to what you do as a civilian. That's more of a, tactics, small level decision making, but it's important since you work in a different field that's more hands off, that the people making those decisions at least have some sort of understanding or perspective of the various parts of the moving machine, so to speak.
All great work happens at the local level, and working in the federal government now, I have to constantly remind people that I'm Plan D. I am not Plan B. And to go ahead and, it's really about giving faith and encouragement and providing the training and the wherewithal for people to make good decisions. I like to use the moniker that was shared by someone about me as I bring calm to chaos. And you just have to take a deep breath. I loved my self-contained demand-type breathing apparatus as a firefighter, and I would physically sit on the couch breathing out of it while watching TV at times as part of my training to see how much air I could suck out of it after the alarm went off and said, I have no more air.
Mm-hmm.
In daily life, we are in this absolutely ever-changing, instant-by-instant life where I feel we need to take a step back and observe, and that's what emergency medical services and fire services taught me, is you need that 360-degree view, and a little information is a lot of information when people will say, well, he just did this or she just did this prior to the medical emergency.
Now,
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, you had talked about the perspective. Share a little bit. Tell me a time, when you were young where you first seriously considered getting into fire and EMS.
I was born and raised in a beautiful part of Northwest Pennsylvania that unfortunately in the 70s was starting to die because of industry moving. The railroads were changing. It was a railroad town. It was an ironworking town. Physically, 500 miles separated either Chicago or New York City. So it was a trade area also. When I was going to high school, I thought that I wanted to be an athletic trainer. And my hope was to be in professional sports, maybe for the Atlanta Braves at the time. I liked them. And from that, as I went for scholarships, I recognized the value of what a human being was doing in the fire service versus what I might be doing as an athletic trainer, and the serving of humanity was way bigger than taking care of a superstar athlete. And then going through the scholarship process and giving the opportunity to go to a large Big Ten school, you have to read the fine print because it's all about the fine print. And I thought, geez, I'm going to go to a school for almost 6 years for a 5.5-year program, and I'm not slow. I mean, I'm an average guy. I work very hard in classes with participation and study, but I'm not one of those people that read a book and know it. And once I realized that I could serve humanity better than being a caregiver to a professional athlete, I was sold on that. My mentors told me that I had the moxie to be able to be a career firefighter. And, once someone takes the time to believe in you and they're sincere and they help educate you, you need to listen to them sometimes. I used to say all the time, actually. But again, that's part of acceptance. Accepting others' insight and foresight about knowing what could be in the world around you.
So how did you end up making the move from up north down to Florida, where you eventually joined the career fire service? So
our volunteer fire department had a magazine and book rack. Once upon a time, the books were all read for the basics of the fire service, and there was a magazine that is still in effect that is the longest subscription magazine in the United States that continued to be published even during the Civil War for the fire service, called Fire Engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And I read an article that said in the south of the United States, particularly Florida, there there was going to be new cities being built out of nowhere, and that these new cities were all going to require career police and fire service personnel. And my friends were going off to college. I made the decision that the author of this article, which I can't remember who it was and wish I could to thank him for it, I told my friends I was going to pack up and move to Florida, that there was an opportunity for me there and I was going to find it and become a firefighter. I had never been farther south than Mount Vernon in Virginia. I had no family farther than 75 miles from where I was born and raised, and just made that commitment to myself because my mentors believed in me, that I could go down and make the dream come true. And fortunately, I did.
Now, how your dad and mom were both still alive. How did your mom handle the move at the time?
So my family, both my mother and father, were decorated soldiers. My mother was a nurse in World War II. My father was an infantry soldier. Both wanted different lifestyles for me. My mother thought I would make a great Jesuit priest. My father wanted me to go to West Point. I had been to West Point 3 times as a youngster. I was in awe of the school. I was in awe of the military. But now I'll take you back to the date of when I graduated, or when I was going through high school, which is 1970.
Mm-hmm.
And Vietnam was a tragic event. And as young men were being brought back to the parish that we belonged to and were being buried, I thought to myself, this probably isn't a good time to go to West Point. In review, it was probably a great time to go to West Point because by the time I graduated high school, the draft had stopped. But I truly believed, and if called, I would have served with no issue at all. I just wasn't going to be a volunteer at that time. And my draft numbers for my last 3 years of high school, the longest one was 50.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought pretty much if the war continued the way it was, my senior trip was going to be to Saigon. Where I was born and raised, there was one career fire department that was surrounded by 6 stations within the city that were all volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of someone in 1973 going to a city and being a career firefighter, I mean, my own friends didn't think that was, very possible, and especially moving away from where people would know you. And my thought is, was, if they see how I can perform and what my attitude will be, I will be able to pass the muster of what they are looking forward to, and I will overachieve what they want. So I'll be able to carry on and do well. But both of them were not pleased in doing that.
I know you said you had considered being a priest for a little bit. I'm not sure. Do you think that was a little bit out of your own curiosity or more out of your mom's pushing at the time?
So it was, I would say both. We had a beautiful parish and a gorgeous rectory, and our priests were, I thought, cool at the time. Monsignor Weschler was older, but he was hip and he was with it, and he was a good guy, because I saw him off duty, I'll say, and off duty is not at church. And then Father Bicey, who was even younger, he was driving a 69 Camaro. And I'm thinking, this is a pretty good deal. Father Wesley's driving a Cadillac, and, Bicey has a Camaro, and the Chevrolet dealership, who also owned the Cadillac dealership, provided that for him because he was a member of the parish. I thought they had a great life. I mean, going ahead and saying Mass, I loved Latin. I could remember my prayers, and didn't need any cheater cards at Mass. From there, they visited the sick and those in need. And so again, I thought that was, perfect in doing that. I enjoyed it. I've always had strong empathy. But then when I went to the seminary in the summer of ninth grade to kind of take a sneak peek into the back of what being a priest was, I didn't think that celibacy was a good thing for me. And from that, I'm an old soul, Christopher, and I'll go back to eighth grade when we were to talk about world religion in class, and I asked. It was an audible report that we had to make in school, and I asked my classmates, they're 24, if they would go ahead and shout out their favorite flavor ice cream, and they all did. And I said, but what we're taught in school is Catholicism is the ice cream, and we are vanilla. And that interestingly
enough, it was Latin Catholicism at the time, which is something that even, as an Eastern Catholic, I still run into challenges at the day where it's like, well, you're not really Catholic if you're not Roman. And it's like, no. Hang on just a second. That's not even what the church teaches.
Well, that report sent me to the principal's office where, again, Monsignor Weschler was brought up from the rectory because the Catholic school was connected, or not connected, but in the same block as the rectory in our parish. And only 4 blocks separated the Catholic hospital from it. So it was like the whole complex. And he told me that, Mike, you're beyond your years in thinking, and I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. But what I am going to tell you is, for you to get past 8th grade, you've got to go through Sister Mary Batista. And if she fails you, you're out of luck, bud. So,
it's interesting because that time period in the Catholic Church, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a priest, I think Leonard Feeney, who eventually would get himself, condemned because he advocated this conception of, if you're a formal member of the church, that's the only way that you can be saved, which is not the tradition of the Catholic Church, and it's not the teaching, because there's that great question of, what about the frog worshiper in Amazon that never got to hear Jesus Christ? What about the people who were born in other traditions and have, a share in the truth of God, and are sincerely seeking him, but through various reasons, may have never had the opportunity. And I think there definitely was a little bit of that conservative tendency, that very external only conception of the church that a lot of theologians were fighting against, to recognize that there's a whole lot that we don't know, as much as we do know about the faith. There's a whole lot of what happens and how judgments are laid down, for people that are not members, or never knew Christ, or were never given that opportunity. And that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. What, but ultimately, tell me a little bit about, can you remember a time where after you became a firefighter that you were like, man, I should have chosen another profession?
So I will make the bold statement that the only problem in anybody's career is when politics happen.
It's like death and taxes, the guarantee of life, isn't it?
It really is. So, when you have a sour apple in a fruit bowl, sometimes all of the fruit doesn't have that sweet taste. But once you're able to recognize it's just an individual and you are able to get away from the negative groupthink, when I started EMS in 1974, we worked 5 24-hour shifts in a row. And my take-home pay was $169. I thought I was sitting on top of the world at 19 years of age. And, you go on calls and then you just have to tell yourself, or someone reminds you, it's just a call. It's 20 minutes of your life or an hour and a half of your life. I never turned back and said, no, I wish I wouldn't have done this, or I would be happy in Atlanta at the clubhouse right now, rubbing that guy's shoulder. Though I will say I'm not a guy that says wow a lot. But meeting John Smoltz was a wow moment in my life, and going ahead and just being able to, because we all need heroes. So I'll go back to a couple weeks ago where, we were out of power for 6 days and the linemen were doing their work. And I talked to one and said, even firefighters need heroes. So thanks a lot.
You're not the first person that said that. Dennis Smith in his, in one of his later books, Report from Ground Zero, said almost the exact same thing, where he was talking about the iron workers that were just scurrying up the debris of the collapse zone of 9/11, like 30, 40, 50 feet up into the air without a moment's thought that they could fall to their death and be impaled. And he was like, there is something to be admired about those iron workers. So you're not the first person that said that.
Yeah. And again, I a very biased, Mike Staley opinion is we bind ourselves in thought, thinking internally a little too much, where we as human beings need to be a little more external and accepting and listening, because we need spices in our life, not only for cooking, but for entertainment and for rest and relaxation. And, Christopher, you're going to recognize that your son that you helped save will uniquely like same things that you do without you even teaching him about them. And it's going to be by example and by kindness and through thought that he is going to absorb that and bring that into his life. Now,
would you, that is probably the most layman's, like, succinct message that I took from your book, Igniting the Leader Within. And that is the one of the big differences between leadership and management is, management is a task that's to be done, but, leadership is a reality or a person to be imitated. But tell me a little bit about one of the, if you don't mind sharing, one of the challenging days that you had talked about before, when you were out on a 911 call and had learned about your father. And would you mind sharing that again, a little bit about, your challenge with your mom pretty much being, your only parent growing up, and then the day that you lost your father?
So, as a young man, I'm talking about 10 and 12 years old, we would have guests at our house. These guests were always prefaced by titles such as Colonel, Major, General, and I never thought much of it. But later in life, I learned, actually, I guess 10, I figured out my father we had a beautiful globe at our house. And he asked me to find Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him I was a little lost. He said, Southeast Asia. Okay, I'm on it. And I found it. And he turned to me and says, well, that's where I'm going to be going for the next 6 months. Okay. I said, what are you going to be there? What are you going to do there? He says, I'm going to be an agricultural advisor. I went, I said, Dad, we're not farmers. What are you going to grow? He says, I'm going to grow young men to be able to take care of their country. And I'm going like, that's interesting. And I can remember the people that would come into our house. This one guy was always so very kind to me. And he said, Mike, you can call me by my first name. And I said, Colonel, when my father tells me I can call you by your first name, is the day that I will call you by your first name.
Mm-hmm.
And my father had a challenge in his life that after World War II, so he was happily married to my mom. That's an edit point. And he didn't assimilate well with civilian life.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother and father had a daughter, Susan, who was 8 years old, and 2 months before I was born, she contracted German measles and died of pneumonia. This is circa 1955.
Mm-hmm.
So that set him off. He was good at many things, and getting away from that area that he lived in, I want to say regressed, but he actually transformed to being a contractor in today's terms, a mercenary in terms of that year. Going ahead and seeing him and it was odd. He would be home for 3 weeks. He'd be gone for 2 weeks. He'd be home for 4 months. He'd be gone for a week. He'd be gone for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
There was no rhyme or reason. I had moved to Florida, and I was.
You think some of that might have been from, when he lost your sister?
Yeah, my mother told me that just set him off, and he needed to be able to do what he was good at and what came natural to him, and that work wasn't in the area that we lived in.
Mm-hmm.
So I had moved to Florida with the blessings of the family. Actually, the first thing they said was, "We'll see you back for Thanksgiving."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "I'll come back for Thanksgiving, no doubt about it." But I'm going to live in Florida, But I was being dispatched on a call. It was going to take us about 12 minutes to get there, and about 4 minutes into the call, dispatcher sent a second unit to the call, which I thought was kind of crazy because it was just a general medical call, and then told us to stop responding and brought us back to the station. And I looked at my partner and I said, we we haven't killed anybody in the last couple of days. Do you remember us doing anything wrong?
You must have been eyeballing each other. What did you do?
I mean, it's like we haven't wrecked an ambulance. We haven't, done anything. It's like, why would they do that to us, And because, wait a minute, the other crew that was going there wasn't as good as we are. So that, why
are they sending the B team?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, oh, well, we got into the station. At that time, the dispatcher was right at that station. And because we're a third party ambulance service, and the dispatcher says, hey, let's go into the conference room. I need to talk to you. We're like, well, it's obviously, me that did something wrong, not my partner. He was relieved. And then he told me that my mother had called, the Pittsburgh Police Department called and said that my father had passed and they want me to come home right away. And so I'm going he says, so we're calling in somebody to take your shift and you can get squared away. And I'm going I don't have anybody to be with.
That must have been a long flight.
And it was a long flight. But I worked the rest of my shift. I said, I have nobody to hang out with. I'm just going to go home to, my stereo and me. Mm-hmm. And, the guy says maybe a good, stiff drink would work for you. And I'm going, I don't need to drink. Let me just kind of reflect in the moment. I called my mother and, the company I was working for actually, got the flight squared away for me. So the next day I could take the next flight out, in the morning. But what was odd was when the police called me and, because it was like phone tag, I called them and then they called me and said, he's got a few questions for me. And I says, I'll answer anything, And he says, well, we want to know why your father had 3 different passports. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what a passport was really, and because I never traveled internationally, and at that time you didn't need a passport to go to Canada, and so I said, what do you mean 3 passports? I says, well, he travels a lot, so maybe, if you lose one, you have the second one. He goes, no. One is a German passport. One is an Israeli passport. One is an American passport. I'm going, well, he works with all of those countries, I guess. Maybe that's something they give you. And I said, I have no idea why. I mean, I really didn't. And talked to him, answered questions, and then he called me back in about 2 hours and said, so we're on the scene, and it was a hotel room, and I had asked about injuries, and he says, your father has significant facial injuries. Mm-hmm. And he called back and he says, while we were there, a person identified themselves as a federal official and asked the police to get out of the room. And 10 minutes later, they let them have the scene, but that evidence was gone. So it gave me a little pause of what my father was doing. When I was graduating from high school, we received a call from Israel, and I wish for the life of me I could remember the person's name right now, but it was a colonel from the Israeli army. Mm-hmm. That apologized that my father was not going to be at my high school graduation because his country needed him. And he says, to help you, he says, I have a son your age, and I need him to be in our family. And I know you miss your dad, but your father here is going to keep us and him safe in the future. So accept that as an apology. Your father wants to be there. So I want to consistently believe that my family has been saving lives for a living for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I accept his life. Beautiful.
Yeah, it certainly is the hidden side that I think that I didn't really understand till getting into the fire service, even though I'm a military brat with 19 veterans in our extended family. But many of them were, years ago. My grandfather had 9 brothers that served concurrently in World War II. He would have been the 10th, but he, as I recall, was working for a munitions factory, and they petitioned him to stay on to continue in the production because they didn't want to have to replace him. So he ended up conceding and taking a deferment. But so much of that is generations ago. The hidden cost of the various aspects of public service on family life and contributing to absent parents. It's something that I know a lot of people still struggle with that I talk with in the profession to this day.
Well, it was, again, when you think of pressure, my father, and I don't know how to say this because I feel bad about it and I feel okay about it, but I'm the first male adult with the name Staley in my lineage that has never served in the military since the Civil War.
Wow.
And I feel, again, if called, I would have gone. I just didn't want to volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Would I have done well in the military? My friends say yes. Would the military have been good for me? Many say yes. But I think we're given a mission. And, as you've known me, Christopher, I've kind of given some insight out of a cat with 9 lives. My
Mm-hmm.
friends would say, I think Staley has 4 left. I'm pretty darn sure he's got 4 left. And they would go through incidents or injuries that has come about in my life. And I truly believe when you pass and there's no resuscitation available for you, you've completed your mission.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would go on calls and I would, quickly observe and remember the elderly woman crying, my husband's gone, and I'm trying to develop a timeline of the last time you saw him, alive and piecing it together within a minute and making the call resuscitate or don't resuscitate.
Mm-hmm.
And on, you I don't know if it's you or, and I'm sorry, you only had one choice to resuscitate with your son and there was no question.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about an elderly person, I'm going like, I think about those I didn't resuscitate more than of all the resuscitations that have gone on.
The questions of how long have they been down? What am
I making the right call?
Yeah.
And I will say this, I feel okay with all of them. Because as you have been given a shoebox of medicine, and you look at it and going like, this is like 6 years old. Yeah, but he still took that when his back hurt.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be okay with ourselves to be able to serve better. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that fire and EMS law enforcement have right now. I'll say my generation, the term was keeping up with the Joneses.
Mm-hmm.
My God, the people now have to keep up with TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and the pressures and the social media that is out there. And again,
The Monday
I
morning
find
quarterbacking of every aspect.
Yeah. You know, and hearing it within seconds. Hey, Jimmy, I don't know if I would have done that if I were you on that call. Are you kidding me? You know, and so I will say this. I am at peace with doing what's right versus what's popular.
Mm-hmm.
And I have broke protocols before in my career with positive results
Mm-hmm.
that turned protocols into guidelines so we could let people physically think on a call and make a decision to stretch those goalposts to do what's right.
You know, that's interesting. One of the flight medics that I know, and first time I was talking with him about, you know, his life and experience in flight medicine after he left the fire service, he was talking about how, at least within his service, if he can articulate the biology and the science and the why of the drug that he gave, the way that a physician would, and the way that a physician would think about doing this, he said they have such flexibility in their EMS protocols because they expect them to take care of patients instead of to do cookie cutter protocol medicine. That was shocking to me.
That is a breath of fresh air to the world, you know, and the thing of it is, within all of our lives, it's taking time to pause so that we can educate ourselves, to invigorate ourselves, to be able to do more with our mind, because we all fall back to training.
Mm-hmm.
When that crisis hits, you know,
you don't get any more time to prepare. You have no more time to prepare. You show up with what you got on you, and that's it.
The resuscitation of your son is a model and monument of those who taught you, bar none, with the extra effort of you learning the whys and why nots
mm-hmm.
of the work.
You know, I think that comes to the takeaway, and there's some stuff. I don't want to get too much into the details of, you know, fire service management and stuff like that, but there's the high frequency, low occurrence, one of the big things that's pushed in, you know, emergency fire service management. Mm-hmm. And the whole question of, as long as we have time to prepare, that is like the best thing. If you have, like, preparing a wedding or preparing for a retirement or something like that, if you've got 3 months to think out a possible scenario through, you can go through and work out, maybe not all of them, maybe not most of them, but a good percentage of the what ifs with the family, the flow chart, so to speak, of how it could possibly go, and to be able to go, okay, I'm primed. If I see this again, this is this is how I'm going to go through, and I'm going to sidestep all of these things that I'm anticipated if I did. And I think that would definitely be a good philosophy for life. I mean, how many of us, I know myself, the first, 2 decades of my life just went through completely undiscerning, but I'd like to kind of use that to go back and look a little bit about what you wrote with your book, Igniting the Leader Within. But as a preface, where would you mind sharing, the quickly or briefly, the aftermath? Because I think when Rescue 911 did their special feature on you, they, it ended with you sailing in the catamaran and saying, you were still hopeful. You had not been given the final news that your fire service career was open. So would you mind talking a little bit about that decade or so transition after the fire service before you went back to work for the feds?
So I'll back up to when I after I think almost 9 weeks in the hospital, I was transferred to a nursing home. I could have gone to a rehabilitation center, but it was going to be hundreds of miles away from my house, and I would never see my friends. And I thought the support network was way more important than these fancy facilities that wanted to take the money from the insurance companies to do that. So when the ambulance picked me up, I said, "Here's where we're going. We're going to the Speedway, and I want Air One to land, take me out of the brig, and have Air One land, and we'll all take some pictures and cry for a few minutes and laugh for a few minutes." And at that point, I had a couple of 4-leaf clover decals made, and the two guys that were on the call landed and gave them the sticker, and I'm going like, "We're not just giving you the sticker. We're gonna put it on the helicopter."
That's
You know?
awesome.
Oh, it was great.
Now,
And
the 4-leaf clover,
Right.
what were the 4 sayings that you had with your 4-leaf clover? I know you talked about that in your book. What would you mind those 4 points of philosophy that you had?
so my friends were calling me lucky, and and again, I do believe in luck, but I believe in divine intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And so my friends are calling me lucky. I said, "I've got to do something with this. I've got to figure out something." So I made the 4-leaf clover, and the first statement is, "You use the attitude you choose."
Mm-hmm.
And second is, commitment is loyalty to yourself. Then life is too long if you do not enjoy every breath of it. And choice, not chance, determines your destiny.
Absolutely.
After the crash, I thought that I was going to go back to the fire service. I was number 1 on the battalion chief's examination, and I was ready to go back to work. And I didn't want to be that battalion chief that was cowering behind his Tahoe when a helicopter landed. So that's why we went out to the Speedway. And so I thought completely that I was going to be able to go back to work. The physical therapist group that I picked is an outstanding group. And I showed them, there was I think it's an AP photographer that was at the Speedway right by where my ambulance was, that took photos like every 5th of a second as I was approaching the car. And so I had those photos to look at, and I brought that book with me. And I says, "I want you to look at this so you understand the mechanism of injury, and let me know if you think you can work with me to get back to work." And he says, "Oh, I've seen the video." I says, "Yeah, well, I've not seen the video. But what do you think?" So I was full blown ready to go back to work. I loved the people and the community that I served. A year after the crash, I was told that I needed to show up for an interview and go through really the basic not education, but the physical agility test for our department. And at that time, I still couldn't tie my own shoes. So the guys were very gracious. They had everything set up at the training facility, and I walked to them. I says, "Guys, I appreciate your love and your loyalty, but I'm not going to be able to take the test today." My fire chief was there, and he told me that I'm going to have to quit. And I said, "Well, no, sir, I'm not going to quit." I said, "You'll have to fire me, and you'll have to be on record
Now that was because your injury was not in the line of duty. It was with
That is correct.
The other county EMS that you had worked for at the time.
It was actually, I was working for the International Speedway.
Okay.
And so it was a off-duty injury.
But you told the chief, you said, no, you're going to have to fire me.
Oh, I did. And I said that because number one, I was mad as hell.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, I knew that I was going to someday get better. And even if I took, and this fire chief and the city council told me I should take a leave of absence when I should have gone ahead and used all my sick time and personal leave time and the dozens of hours that people would have given me.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't align with the union contract, so I was terminated. I would be terminated, which he did. And because I thought I could go back someday and serve. But that didn't happen. I was terminated, and I thought, man, what am I going to do now? I can't sit down for a long time. I can't stand up for a long time. I have no idea what I'm going to do. And a buddy of mine came to me and says, Mike, you've got such a beautiful story. You have to tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going like, to who? And who's going to pay me? And he says, there are companies that are looking for you. They just don't know you're there. And I said, what makes you feel that I could do this? And I was a member of Toastmasters International and went through their whole program. And at the regional contest, either the guy that was promoting me to tell my story or I would win. It was either back and forth. It was a 50-50 bet, depending on who did the best that day. So I had to transform myself and figure out something. Fortunately, during that same time, the Central Florida area was attempting to develop a disaster medical assistance team.
Mm-hmm.
DMAT. Mm-hmm. And I was working strongly on that concept of operation, and started giving speeches. And again, the Rescue 911 episode, I told the people there that, I'm not doing this to help you. I'm doing this to say thank you to those that saved my life and to promote trauma care and physical therapy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the focus was going to be on, not me. And then, that was kind of a challenging moment also where they're asking me about my height and width and such. And I said, well, what is this all for? Are you going to buy me a new suit or something like that? What do you need to know my chest size for?
You buying
no.
Building your coffin for you already, just in case they don't like you?
I was truly confused. And they said, no, this is for the actor. We match people up to what they look like the most and such. And I said, well, I've got some good news and some bad news. I said, the bad news is you're not going to hire an actor. The good news is I'm just going to play myself.
Yep.
And they said, we don't do that. And I said, well, okay, it was nice talking to you, and hung up. They called back in a few minutes and said, we got disconnected. I said, oh, I know. I hung up. You said that you weren't going to do that. So there's no, I told you it was nice talking to you, didn't I? I didn't just hang up. I thanked you.
You were just upset that it was like that 9/11 movie. You didn't want Nicolas Cage playing your part.
I didn't even see it. I didn't even see that movie. But yeah, I actually told him this. I said, who do you think is going to get you a Bell Jet Ranger to use, and an emergency room, and my friends, and a trauma room, and an ICU room to go ahead and film? I says, if I don't play, none of my friends are going to play, and I'm going to tell everybody that's involved not to do it. How about that? And they says, well, if you think you could psychologically handle it, I went, psychologically handle it? I said, I've already been hit by the car. It's not, you're not going to hit me again, you know? I said, yeah, I think I'll be okay. And I'll tell you, I'm the only person in that TV show's history that ever played themselves. And I think it was a turning point for some of the people that put the show on also. So I went ahead and started giving thanks to physical therapy groups and to trauma groups by telling my story. I had a great lead in by being able to show the first 7 minutes of the Rescue 911 episode.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be able to be introduced by William Shatner was kind of a good thing. And then I started to learn that organizations were looking for good news stories. And I'll take this to the fire service. I would cold call companies, and I would cold call them because I read an article in a newspaper, and it talked about how the company's having a challenge in this. And that's how I would learn the vice president's name, and they're working on the, I'll just say Starlift project is taking a turn for the worst. I'd call them up and find out through the gatekeepers who to talk to and get me in. And I'd ask them the simple question, sir or ma'am, whoever, do you have a corner office? Do you have windows in your office? And they'd say, yes. I said, would you stand up a minute and look outside and tell me if you see any large, thick, black columns of smoke? And they would always say no. And I'd go, do you know why that is? And they said, something's not on fire. I said, good. So you understand then, by prevention and education, you stop fires. Right now, you have a fire, or at least a smoldering, not free burning, but it's smoldering by the report that was in the newspaper today. And many times I'd catch these people off guard because they didn't even know their company was in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this was back before, this was back before Facebook. This was back before really the the internet was obviously around, but
internet.
I mean, you had dial-up. That was all you really had back then.
Yeah.
Let alone smartphones or anything like that.
Oh, no. So that gave me an advantage, and I says, the fire service believes in prevention and education. I says, right now, there's obviously something that needs to be corrected, but also what needs to be instilled in your workers and your project managers is bad things happen, but good things can move forward,
mm-hmm.
and you can succeed. And very fortunately, that carried me very well until September 11th. And besides our brothers in New York that died that day and all of the civilians that passed, it stopped the speaking industry and the convention industry.
Mm-hmm.
No one wanted to travel. All meetings were being canceled, no matter where they were in the United States. From that, I feel very fortunate that my 5 buddies that were lost that day, they weren't lost, they died that day, were all retrieved. And from that, I'm very thankful. But after the 3rd funeral that I was at, a guy came to me and asked me what I was going to do for the brothers next. I'm going like, I don't know you, dude. I mean, what do you, excuse me, what do you think I should be doing? And this was a guy from Squad 18 in the fire department of New York City. And it says, we need you at the next big one, so that we trust somebody on that scene and we do what they do. This is, all of us already know we're going to die within 20 years or so because of what we've ingested on the pile. And I'm going like, are you serious? He goes, yeah. And then he like disappeared in the crowd, you know, and looking for a firefighter in a dress uniform at a New York City fire department funeral is
a needle on a needle stack.
Yeah. And I never knew the guy's name, never found out. And I came home and I started telling my buddies that were helping with putting this DMAT team together. And at that time, we were already talking about anthrax and how to provide medicine to the public during an anthrax event, and then bam, anthrax event.
Yep.
And I searched out the company that was providing the contractors for a national organization to respond to those Category A agent events. And within 2 weeks of my packet getting to that company, I was hired. And again, I feel it's been a privilege to help develop the medical countermeasure capabilities that we have in the United States, which has served us well even through the pandemic.
You know, that's very interesting, you sharing that with, 9/11 changing the landscape of, public speaking and stuff like that. Cause I had this podcast, or this idea, a couple of years ago. Granted, I was still very busy with graduate school and, wife and kids and everything else and a job. And COVID changed all of that. That has made people's interest to see that there are other avenues to better themselves, to learn, to engage their mind, besides just going and sitting in an academic building and forking over sometimes tens of thousands of dollars a semester to hear people talk about this, or to whatever subject that is that they want to learn about. But you talking about the medical aspect with him, that's it's a little bit more of what you've gotten into now, the past 20 years or so. But I did not even realize that until, my dad shared with me. He was a military officer at the time, and his background was in pharmacology and hazardous materials. And he was actually on the, with his assignment at CDC at the time, was on the assigned list on their jet from the Emergency Operations Center to be going up to New York as CDC's response to the collapse of the towers. And interestingly enough, they pulled him off of the jet at the last minute and kept him at their headquarters here because he was, you're thinking 2001, dial up, very little public. I mean, the only people that had computers were either wealthy or they were poor and they were nerds like my dad.
Yeah.
And they kept him back because he ended up putting a lot of, for the agency that he worked for at the time, a lot of the MHMIs and the toxic exposure facts that was his specialty up online so that the secondary and tertiary care providers could begin to start to look at all of the health aftermath of everything that people were breathing in and were exposed to. It wasn't even until reading Dennis Smith's book, Report from Ground Zero, of the level of, chemical containers that they had for, their air conditioning system buried in the sub-basements of the towers, just all kinds of stuff like that you would never even think of unless you'd worked in the profession and had pre-planned something like that. But what do you see? What would you, if you had a 3 to 5 minute, what would be your message to, members in the fire service or members in the public service community today? What would be your words of wisdom or your words of advice to them?
Your next breath's not promised. Think about it. Your next breath is not promised. On a prayerful side of life, I don't ask God to give me anything but one thing. Give me your grace to do thy will. That is my mantra. That is my focus. Give me the grace to do thy will. You don't have to be a religious person to tie into that, because if you're in the fire service and the most craziest call you've ever been on, where it's been an extrication call or a rope rescue call, it happens in minutes and seconds. It doesn't happen usually in hours and days. It happens that quickly. That family first is everything. That I could not have succeeded in my career or continue to succeed in my career without my family. And that the sacrifice our families make for us is something we can't even wrap our hands around. So, family first. You have to start using some 4-letter words in your vocabulary. And that's love and hope and care. For the naysayers in your surroundings, people go, you don't want to burn bridges. You know what? I say light them on fire. You need to step away from some of this caustic atmosphere and individuals that might be determining your future without you recognizing they're determining the future. Burn the bridges. Get away. Run away. Allow yourself to be at peace with yourself. Now listen, allow yourself to be at peace with yourself. That is my most challenging statement for me every day. Is everything going to be okay? Absolutely not. There's going to be hiccups in your life that you'd never imagined. You know that, Christopher, more than others, with the care and love from your son. Going ahead and be nice to yourself. Learn how to be nice to yourself. So I'm a frugal guy. I'm not cheap. If I want something, I do some research and I find out the best thing possible. But also, I'll find something out, like I'll take a vehicle. You can buy a great vehicle, but if you don't have a great mechanic to take care of it, why buy it? Mm-hmm. So think of the follow through of every action. Has a reaction. Kindness for yourself. Kindness for your family. Love for those around you makes it pretty damn easy and gives you the confidence to go out and make necessary decisions for strangers and people we don't know. I'll be so bold, and people ask me about my fire service career, and I'll say, the crew that I worked with is the crew that young mother prayed for when her child was hurt. There's a fine line sometimes between being braggadocious, and Dizzy Dean from our baseball past said it's not bragging if you've done it. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to do things alone. you're going to always have your buddy. And again, old fire school, always be able to touch your partner in front of you. You
can't go to the bathroom without bringing your partner with you.
I mean, and except, and we've lost the frivolous, gut wrenching laughing that used to be in the fire service. A buddy of mine that I had in fire school, I got out of the fire service to be a medic for the movie industry.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up a couple of weeks ago that on his second shift, they sent him out to one of the rigs to the toolbox to bring in a metric crescent wrench, which of course there is none.
Oh, yeah.
That's why you use a crescent wrench. So being able to look in the mirror and laugh.
That's hilarious. I think the funniest one, this guy ended up becoming a chief of a state agency. But he had shared with me this irony. He said, when his first day on the job, they said, "Hey, you need to go up to the so-and-so station, at the department next door. You need to get, our hose stretcher. Here's the truck keys, just go get this." And so he was a smart cookie. He's like, "I know there's no such thing as a hose stretcher." He said, "Absolutely, chief." So he goes up there. He goes up to that station. They go, hey, no. We loaned it to so-and-so department. It's all the way on this side of the town. You need to go get that from them. So he kept driving around. He goes to that station. They go, "Hey, I'm looking for a hose stretcher." No. We moved it to them. So he gets a phone call like 4.5 hours later. "Where are you?" And he's like, "Well, I went," and he recounted the whole story. And she's like, "Get your butt back here." He's like, "Hey, man, I knew it was all a scam, but I got paid 4.5 hours to go drive around in the city truck." Well, I wasn't worried. I had the easiest day I've had so far.
That is a lesson learned of taking advantage of the opportunity. And Christopher, I know we're short on time, but I'd like to pass on in memory of the greatest rescue ever made in the United States. My buddies that gave so much to me in learning and sharing in the fire service, and Patrick Brown, Christopher Blackwell, Andy Fredericks, Billy McKinn, and Ray Downey. My brothers, who I believe are still around me and guide me.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing them and for telling so much about your own life and your own struggles and your own journey. It's something that we as firemen we like to joke we're born without feelings, but we very much have them, even if we sometimes don't share them in front of others. And I wanted to say thank you so much for your time and coming on today.
I thank you for the opportunity to serve. Again, life without service must be so challenging and empty for those that do not give. Because I personally know the more you give, the more you get. And that's not trying to get something. It's just, again, the empathy and the kindness and the caring. And I'll kind of close on this because I didn't grow up in a racial, well, I guess I did grow up in a racially divided world, but I've never bought into it. My father taught me to remember a human being by the color of their eyes, not their skin. And going ahead and developing that empathy, that's what we need. And again, that and I have to repeat this for myself every day because I'm not good at it. To be kind to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to help change the world, and that's the change in the world we need. That we can, and it's about acceptance, and it's about not being. I can't think of the word right now. Offended.
Mm-hmm.
But to be aware, and I think that's what will serve the people listening to this podcast the best. And as I've always told you, and Christopher, when I can help you, make contact.
Absolutely. So for my listeners out there, Mike, you have a Twitter handle. Would you mind sharing that, or some?
Yeah, I don't mind. And it's MFSTALEY. MFSTALEY. It's just Michael Francis Staley. I'm not that bright that I could think of all these different names that people have given themselves. But within that, what I share on Twitter is biased opinions, pictures of the beauty of nature around me, some historical facts that I review every day, because I look at history to teach me. And we must learn from those that have gone before us. And we must always remember, no matter what the situation might be.
Now, you say pictures of nature. Isn't one of those pictures of you in front of a UN helicopter carrying Ebola?
So I had the gift of being dispatched to Africa in 2014, and then back again in 2015. I was there for 2 60-day stints. And the quick answer is yes. I was fortunate enough to work with the United Nations. Before I got there, there was already national protocol by the World Health Organization on how to transport biological specimens.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the people in the United Nations were so afraid of the Ebola that they refused to be able to allow those blood samples of patients that were thought to be having Ebola to go ahead and be transferred. And when we're talking transfer, in Sierra Leone, Africa in 2014, there's not like a nice machine you go to
mm-hmm.
and pack blood samples and drive it 200 miles to an area. So I went to them and said, what do we need to do to make this magic happen? And they says, I don't know. You're going to have to convince us. And so I developed the concept of operation that we would use the already approved WHO containers that were sealed, and I would take those containers and put them in a igloo cooler. I would go ahead and take that igloo cooler and duct tape it together so it couldn't open,
Mm-hmm.
and then wash it with a chemical substance. And then we could take it in the helicopter back to the laboratory, sometimes 400 miles away, to get squared away and tested. And and that was firefighter logic.
Yes. With duct tape.
And
it would not be complete without the duct tape.
It wouldn't be. But I can tell you, everything was. I had photocopies of what the hazardous material, that it would have to be in the United States. We did it all. And it was funny because after the convincing of the people from that owned the helicopters, then they said your next step is to go ahead and convince our pilots. And for those of you that don't know who flies Russian helicopters, it's Russians and Chechens. And these helicopters are, first of all, super cool, and they're super big, but they're efficient. And when I talked to the 25-member staff of the crew that was there, I asked them how many people can understand English, and there were 6 of them that raised their hand. And so I went ahead and asked them if they would interpret for me. They said yes. And I told them that this isn't rocket science that we're dealing with here. It's germs. And then I asked them if they remembered Khrushchev. I think I called him Mr. Khrushchev because I can't think of his name. Couldn't think of his name then, can't think of it now. And they all after the interpretation, they all raised their hands. So then I unlaced my boot and took it and started smashing it on the makeshift table that I had and said, "This is how this is going to be." And I promised this is how this was going to be. And they all started laughing because they remembered Khrushchev doing that at the United Nations during a speech. And so once again, here it is. It's humor. It's being able to laugh. It's being able to accept that these guys started clapping and laughing in guttural laughs, just not a ha-ha. That they understood, that I understood them a little bit about their nation, and they were willing to do the work. And they physically saved thousands of lives by letting that happen, which I will tell you today is still being used as there is an Ebola outbreak in Uganda. And a buddy of mine texted me and said, "Yep, we pulled up your protocol, Mike. Still being used today, old man." So again, what you do, big believer in karma too. What you do will come back to you. So that little bit of joy of knowing that I'm still able to save lives for a living is very rewarding. God, give me the grace to do thy will.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully in a future episode I can have you on again to talk about your book, igniting the leader within, which sadly is out of publication and only able to be had secondhand. But who knows? Maybe once you retire from the feds, you might be able to write another book out there and give us some sneak peeks on on your perspective from emergency management far above and just your time with the fire service. But Mike, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. And now it seems like I have to end meetings. If I offended anybody in any way, please seek counseling. Use your employee assistance program to the best of their capabilities.
And here's the coupon code for that, which I do not have. I'm sorry.
Christopher, it's unfortunately somewhat the world landscape that we live in right now. It's kind of it's challenging, but it's true. So as I share, and we'll sign off again, the only thing that you should need to make yourself laugh is a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
That's the real deal right there. So yes. Thank you all. And with that, I'll close the way I end most conversation, and that is, I love you, and I mean it.
Mike, I love you too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Once again, this is your host, Christopher, of the Ukrainian Fire Chaplain Show. If you have not already, go ahead and look at our website, theufcshow.com. It's got information about us and ways that you can follow, subscribe, or support us. We're on various podcast platforms. We're on Facebook and YouTube. And if you're able to, consider supporting us on Patreon. Also want to give a shout out to Daniel Atchison, the music artist Atch, for permission to use his song Forever in our productions. Until next time.